Parenting is amazing. It can be so beautiful and so hard. We all really want to raise healthy, balanced, faithful children, but,
we're trying to pass on this beautiful faith, and we're working out our own salvation right here every day with our kids.
My name is Christian Gonzalez. I'm the father of 3 wild, beautiful daughters.
And I'm Melissa Bielatich Davis, and I have a whole house full of kids from tweens to young adults, and some already out in the world.
And we're here to join you on this journey through the highs and lows of parenting, amidst snotty noses, messy rooms, and busy schedules.
We don't have it all figured out, but we're in it with you. And our message is simple. Dear parents, you're not alone.
Welcome to Trials and Triumphs from the Trenches. Well, hello, Lisa.
Hello, Christian.
It's good to see you again.
It is good to see you.
And as always, man, every time we do this, I feel like there's something in recording time that just continues to infect us. I mean, speaking of infections, we were sick for the entire month of May out here. So
geez.
Things were brutal. Man.
Yeah, see, I did the opposite. I was just having parties all the time because everybody was graduating. I had one graduate from college, one graduated from high school. Between them graduating and all their friends graduating, it was like the entire month of May. It was like Pascha, graduation.
Oh my gosh.
And then a Greek festival. It was crazy.
Oh my gosh.
So it's just as well. We did not record anything in May because we were both checked out in our own ways. But here we are into June. Christ is risen. We have just a couple more days of Pascha left, and then we get back to regular.
Yes.
I already feel back to regular, to tell you the truth. Pascha came too late this year.
It was so late. Cinco de Pascha is hard. It is a really hard time to do that.
Yeah. It's hard to feel Pascha when it's like spring was over. And so it was like, we're already in summer. That's weird. Like,
the sun is just mean. Like our sun is mean. Today,
your son's really mean. Arizona, it's rough. Texas, not very friendly either.
I'm sure that's the case, but I don't. Do you ever feel the depths of despair when you find yourself legitimately happy to say the words, "Kids, it's only going to be 104 today"?
Thank God, no. For us, it's more like, well, as long as it doesn't get over 98, we're going to be okay.
Yeah. Well, and that was it too. That was when I realized how sad I really am. Was when I was like, it's only going to be 104, guys. And I was like, oh, that's really sad, actually.
That is really sad. It is. Life is hard in Arizona.
It is. Man. It is tough.
Life is hard.
It is.
But see, it's that kind of aesthetic struggle, Christian. It's that kind of aesthetic struggle here in the domestic monastery that's turning you into a saint, grinding you into a fine flower.
Exactly. And it's exciting because here we are now at the final chapter, finally, the final chapter, finally, of the domestic monastery. So, this brings us kind of to the end of the day, talking about this part in our home where the kids are in bed, we're at the end of our ropes, and, we've just got a little time before it's time to go to bed ourselves. I mean, this is probably, a lot more with those of us who have like younger-ish children and in the home and like what to do post that. So the thing that we're looking at in the monastic life, the part of the rhythm of life, is a service that is often called the midnight office. And the midnight office is pretty much what it sounds like. It's prayers in the middle of the night.
Yes. I don't know where they got the word office in there, I have to say. I'm going to have to do it. I'm going to investigate. I'll let you know.
Yeah, but is that like a thing, like the daily office? And it's like the hours and stuff are all part of the daily office.
Interesting.
Maybe it's an offering. Maybe it's rooted, like connected to the word offering somehow.
That would make sense because I feel like we really mostly use it on the midnight service, and it's always weird to me.
Yeah.
But yes, in the midnight office, and so in monasteries, people really are up in the middle of the night to do prayers. Like they have a very different rhythm that involves being up very late at night. And most of us do not strive for that because it does not match well with our work structures and our school structures and all of that. But but the monks really do like go to bed, sleep for a while, and then get up at midnight.
Yeah. And really the the time, the midnight office is really characterized by penitence and hopeful anticipation. And I mean, it can be traced all throughout like different places in the history of the church. I mean, even like Saint Mark of Ephesus, he says the beginning of all the hymns and prayers to God is the time of the midnight prayer. For rising from sleep for it, we signify the transportation from the life of the deceit of darkness to the life which is, according to Christ, free and bright, with which we begin to worship God. For it is written, the people who sat in darkness saw a great light. So even here we see that, St. Mark is kind of showing us that like the prayer of God's people begins in the darkness. Like it's a place of looking for the light to break through, which is always the moment that we love, right? In the Paschal celebration is when the priest emerges saying, "Come receive the light." It's in the
Yes.
darkest moment that the light breaks through and shines so brilliantly, and it's beautiful. So St. Mark kind of
It is beautiful.
encourages us toward that same kind of space.
And I love that orthodoxy acknowledges darkness. You know what I mean? Like it's not like, oh, well, it's just always Christ came, so everything's good. So it's like, okay, you have to return to the darkness so that you can appreciate the light.
Mm.
And so we have this cycle every day where we return. We have a cycle every year where we return. It is very beautiful. I love it.
Yes. Yeah. And there's just a lot of, and like the thing with like the midnight service here too, and I think the place that the church is trying to get us is in the fact that like in the middle of the night things are pretty still. It's quiet, and it's like all of creation is just waiting for the sun to come up. That's the moment where we're just like at our most restful, and there's something like the Celtics talk about thin places. The idea where
Yes.
like the veil between heaven and earth is just particularly thin, and I think that the midnight office like is kind of speaking into some of this, right? That
Yes.
uh, yeah, it's a place where we really get a step into it.
I
Um,
love that. That's beautiful.
yeah,
What
and there's so much to it, and there's a longer quote from Hippolytus that I want to read too, that I think is just
I
really
love this
beautiful.
quote. I'm
Yeah,
so fired
where
up that you found this. I think it's so cool.
do you want to read it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. This is great. Christian found it, but I'm going to read it. Around midnight, rise and wash your hands with water and pray. If you are married, pray together. But if your spouse is not yet baptized, go into another room to pray and then return to bed. Do not hesitate to pray, for one who has been joined in marital relations is not impure. Those who have bathed have no need to wash again, for they are pure. By catching your breath in your hand and signing yourself with the moisture of your breath, your body is purified, even to the feet. For the gift of the Spirit and the outpouring of the baptism, proceeding from the heart of the believer as though from a fountain, purifies the one who has believed. Thus it is necessary to pray at this hour. For those elders who handed down the tradition taught us that in this hour, every creature hushes for a brief moment to praise the Lord. Stars and trees and waters stand still for an instant. All the host of angels serving him, together with the souls of the righteous, praise God. That is why it is important that all those who believe make certain to pray at that hour. Testifying to this, the Lord says thus, Behold, a cry was made at midnight, saying, Behold, the bridegroom is coming, arise to meet him. And he adds, saying, Watch therefore, for you do not know when the hour is coming. I love that. Right. I mean, first of all, I just want to say part of the reason I love this so much is because my husband is not Orthodox, right?
Mm.
I've remarried someone who is working his way toward it, but is not there. And I love that he's speaking directly to that here at the beginning and saying, hey, by the way, if your spouse is not Orthodox, um, you still go pray, right? You still go pray, even if your spouse, pray together, or if your spouse isn't coming, okay, pray alone,
Yeah,
but go
go do the
pray.
thing.
And
Yeah.
I think that's lovely. I
Mm.
think it's really nice, and it's very encouraging, I think, for those people who are seeing again and again, like you and your spouse, and they're like, I don't have a spouse, or my spouse won't cooperate. Like, that's okay. Just do it yourself.
Mm.
But then also, he speaks about the same thing you were just saying, this idea of all of the creatures, all of the earth, the angels too, are all like hushed. And at this moment, they all stop and pray,
Hmm.
which is very beautiful. And so, of course, we should pray as well. And then he brings up the bridegroom and this vigilance, right? This watchfulness, this idea that we need to be up in the middle of the night so that we're ready for when the bridegroom comes. It's such a great quote, Christian. I've never seen it, and I just thought it
Yeah,
was
it's
so good.
beautiful, right? And even just
Beautiful.
that bit where he says, by catching your breath in your hand and signing yourself with the moisture of your breath, your body is purified even to the feet for the gift of the Spirit and the outpouring of baptism proceeding from the heart of the believer as though from a fountain purifies the one who has believed. It's like this, the moisture of our breath becomes this like baptism to the world, and
Yes.
to ourselves, because it's the Spirit that breathes within us. It's this, it's remarkable. It's just a remarkable image.
Well, and we
And
see
yeah.
Christ like blowing the Spirit, right? Or breathing
Mm.
the Spirit onto us, right? Or we see the Spirit as breathing. But I don't know that I've ever thought about the idea that if the Spirit is sealed within me, then my breath contains the Spirit,
Mm.
right? Like that's
Super cool.
beautiful. That's super cool. It's a neat image.
Yeah, I love it. So, even with like the watching for the bridegroom at midnight, um, I don't know that we're necessarily suggesting that everybody needs to wake up at midnight or 2 o'clock, but I guess like if you've got a bebe, you're
Yeah.
probably getting up in the middle of the night. But even if you
Yeah.
don't, like most of us are barely getting enough sleep as it is, because it's just life. But
Yep.
I do think that there is still something valuable to consider within the life of the domestic monastery. And that's, I think, in terms of like, well, we've done the thing, we've put the kids to bed. Like, now what do we do? Now that the kids are in bed, what do we do with our grown up time? How do we end our
Yeah.
day? What does it look like for us to come to a still place um, ourselves and kind of get re-grounded and reconnected for all the things um, that are ahead? So I think it's been a common refrain that we've said through the time of that we've been doing this. But it is important to remember that the number one tool that we bring to our parenting is us. Like we are it. There's no instrument other than you. So what matters is who we are becoming, and who we become is largely due to our habits. Everything we do is just a vote toward the kind of person that we want to be. So I do think that this is why it's important for us to kind of reflect on what we do with our grown up time after we've said goodbye to our roles and responsibilities as parents. So I guess, Elisa, I would wonder, I'm curious, like what does your grown up time look like? I mean, your kids are older than mine, so it's probably a little
Yeah.
different than kind of how things roll for me.
It's interesting because it sort of changes over the seasons, right? Like when my kids were little, my grown up time, the first thing I did was like straighten up the house because I couldn't relax. And then once everything was ready and cleared away and everything, I could sit down and just relax. And I did, read or answer emails, sometimes watch a little bit of TV, not a lot. But then as the kids get older, yeah, you don't necessarily get grown up time until you go in your room and close the door and kind of
Mm-hmm.
like lock them out, and then you could have some grown up time. And then later, as they've gotten even older, like now they might, a lot of them are out of the house. And then I've remarried, and my husband really loves to watch TV. And so we watch TV together, but I'm a little too ADHD to just sit down and like watch TV at night because I forget that I'm watching. So I'll just hop up and like mop the floor or do something else. So I pull out my computer and I'm sitting there and I'm like taking care of emails, or I don't know, doing my homework for class, or I've written several books while watching television because the TV is just on in the background and I'm ignoring it and just writing. It turns out with ADHD, actually, you can focus better sometimes with lots of noise. I did not know that, but here we are. And so anyway, so yeah, the TV is on. I would say I don't focus a lot on it, but we do watch a lot of TV. But I personally, I can't watch a lot of really, I can't watch like violent things. I can't, I find that I'm really sensitive to visual images. So
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of mild on the TV choices. I don't know. How about you, Christian? What do you do in the evenings?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, there's seasons, right? There's sometimes when things feel just kind of like really messy or dragged out for bedtime. I think it's really easy just to slip into a kind of like narcotic evening. By that I mean
Mhm.
just like numbing out, watching television,
Yeah.
looking at the YouTubes. I mean, whatever, right? It's like really easy to be super unintentional and just be totally like narcotizing yourself like into the evening.
Yeah, it
Um,
is.
so it's interesting because I what I don't want to use my time for in the evening is just to entertain myself, right? Like there's sometimes when we're watching like a really good show and we'll it'll be like a bonding thing for me and my wife because we're like into,
Yeah.
I think we talked about Severance before. Like we loved
So
Severance,
good.
so
So
good,
good.
and I'm so excited that they're finally gonna
Yeah.
make season 2. So, hooray! But yeah, I guess
Yeah.
there's a larger question I think of entertainment, maybe even in some of this space. Like, what should our relationship with entertainment look like? I guess after the kids go to
Hmm.
bed, because I think
Yeah.
sometimes I can feel really guilty that like I want to just go watch a television show, especially because with our kids, like we don't really let them watch TV during the week, right? So we're like, no,
Right.
you can't watch TV. We only watch TV on Fridays for family movie night. And but then it's like, oh, we have to go like slip off into TV land to find out what happened in Severance,
Right.
and they don't get mad at us. Our kids like don't get mad, but they certainly comment on it. They're like, oh, you guys gonna go watch your show now? You guys gonna go watch
Yeah.
your show?
Yeah.
And I see them like working out that it's like it's not fair that mom and dad get to watch TV and they don't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Well, and it's like you're doing all this work to keep them from being kind of addicted to TV. And then at the same time, they're just thinking like, oh, when I'm an adult, then I can be addicted to TV. It's
Yeah,
pretty
exactly.
super.
That's actually the lesson I want them to learn. Listen,
Yes.
kids, this is America. You can be addicted to whatever you want to be addicted to.
Right. But just wait till you're 18.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but there is something to the bonding thing, right? Like not all entertainment is necessarily just like a self-numbing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if it's really fun, if you're really enjoying it together and you're talking about it and you're just kind of getting a kick out of it, I think it can be really bonding and lovely and good. And the same thing about like if you were both reading the same book or something, it would be the same
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. It's not like lesser necessarily because it's television or it's movies or something. But I do think there's a way that we can get very unintentional about
Mm.
just that automatic, like, oh, I have some time now. Obviously, I'm going to turn on the television. And I grew up in a house where the TV was on nonstop, always, 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 24/7. And it was like the sound of it was company. And
Mm.
when I started having kids, there was just this moment in my life, and I'm not even sure what was going on or why, but I was just like, I don't want this. Like, I just don't want the sound all the time. And so I used to have the TV on all day long, whether I was watching it or not. And I grew up watching soap operas and all sorts of stuff. And it was a lot of nonsense and it's a huge time sink. And so just one day I was like, I just want it to be quiet in my house. Like, I want to be
Mm.
prayerful and quiet. And I stopped, and it was a huge improvement. And so now, I try to be like, is this really a moment? Is there something I really want to watch? Or am I like just looking for something to do because I'm bored? And I
Mm.
think, so I think it's not all equal, right? Some of it
Right.
actually is pretty high quality. And some of it is really just passing time. And that's probably not
Yeah.
as useful.
No, that's a really, I think, a really good distinction to make. And boredom is such a funny thing to me too, because like it's I don't I mean I have a hard time imagining boredom being a thing that we feel in the kingdom of God, right?
Right.
Like it's like so clearly
Yeah.
like a problem of like our age,
Yeah.
where we have,
Totally.
and it's crazy too that we're more bored than ever, but we have like more options to fill our time with than ever too. Like think about any
Yeah.
streaming service. It's like there's so much content, and yet we're so like, I don't want to. I'm bored. I don't want. Like, how are we
Yeah.
bored? I have
We're
access on my phone to
dissatisfied,
like thousands and thousands and thousands of songs. Like I can
right?
do. I mean, but I'm so like meh, or podcasts or whatever. Podcasts,
Yeah.
woo. Uh, but yeah, it's crazy. Like we use it
Yeah.
to simultaneously fill the void of our boredom, but we get like more bored with it somehow as well.
Yeah.
And so I do wonder like that how do we use the evening time, the grown-up time, whether it's collectively with someone or by ourselves, just to get like reconnected,
Mm-hmm.
like because it's so easy to fall into our roles and responsibility. We've been talking about the story stuff for, the whole time. Like, what's the story? And the story can easily just be, I am my responsibilities. And then once those responsibilities are done, now I can reward myself by falling asleep while I'm awake, to the world around me. But
Yeah.
maybe there is something like, hey, we need to use this grown up time to reconnect, with the Lord, to reconnect with one another,
Yep.
um, with ourselves, to see
Yeah.
what's the day been for me. What kind of day have I had?
Right.
you know?
Yeah. As something restorative, something rejuvenating, right? Like something where you're not hiding from what your day was, but you're processing what your day was.
Yeah.
And if you're married, you're processing it with each other. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
you're having a great conversation, or maybe you're, doing something new, like watching a different thing than you've watched before or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. But I think you're right. I think you want it to be connecting. You don't want it to be that's what it is like when you're bored and you're just watching TV and you're bored of it and you are disconnecting from the universe, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
as you say, if my story is that my life is my responsibilities, I've completed my responsibilities and now I'm going to disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a little bit what, alcohol and drug addictions are in some ways, right? Like I just
Mm-hmm.
want to disconnect. I want to check out. And so, to try to think about, is it really restorative for me to check out? Or isn't it more restorative for me to find something to check into that is that's produces joy or produces connection or helps me to process some struggles that I'm having or,
Yeah, this is
something
interesting because, like,
productive.
I've never thought about like the checking out thing in the framework of. I mean, I think about checking out because it's like a really easy activity,
Yeah.
it like
Yeah.
provides
Because we're all really
something.
good at it.
Yeah, and it almost works, right? Like
Yeah.
it almost helps. And then I think about like Jesus, and like I wonder, like, do you think he ever checked out?
I don't think he checked out from God, right? Like his relation. I mean, he went to the wilderness to pray. Like when John the Baptist was killed, he was like I am at the end of a really bad day with the kids. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I can't take any more time with you. I love you. I'll be back later. But
Yeah, but
right
it's not like
now,
he went to the movies and got himself some popcorn. You know
right,
what I
he
mean?
went to
And just,
pray.
yeah, he went to pray
Yeah.
and
He
was
he
like
was
super
connected to
sad.
the Father.
Mm-hmm.
He was always connected to the Father, even when he kind of walked away from us a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
where when he needed space. I don't know if you would say he needed space, but whatever it is, right? He withdrew
Yeah,
sometimes,
yeah,
which isn't always the same thing as disconnecting. He was probably
yeah.
praying for us.
Yeah, so maybe there's like that difference, right? The idea is like connection and rest versus like numbing and checking out, right? That like
Yeah.
how does um the midnight office, which the church is, again, this portion of what we're looking at in those quotes, they're saying like the day begins with the midnight office. Like this isn't the end of the day. This is the end of the day for us in the domestic monastery, perhaps felt in a
Yeah.
felt sense. But how do we
Yeah.
maybe even start to think about this as the beginning of the new day, right? Like maybe this is the beginning of the new day. The dark, like it starts in the dark, right? There was evening and there was morning. Like maybe this is where things begin. So
Yeah.
how do we use this as a space to begin tomorrow, to begin the next sunrise moment with from a posture of rest and connection, rather than like how do I make it through this evening, go to bed with dread, wake up with dread. Like we don't want
Yeah.
that. So this is actually a really helpful framework to me because for a long time, my wife and I've been trying to figure out like what does our post bedtime routine kind of look like, for us. And one of the things that we had landed on was that we feel like it'd be really good, and we try to do it, and sometimes we're more successful than others, is to give each other like one night a week off where each other is freed from parental obligations. So it's like one person is there just to put the kids to bed and deal with extra glasses of water that are
Mm,
needed, and all the things that are there, cleaning up the kitchen, and it's just doing it solo. Like that's just the gift that we want to try to give each other. Um, Although it's kind of funny because sometimes like when I get to the point where I'm like putting the kids in bed and I'm feeling like, okay, I'm ready to be done with my parental responsibilities. Like I'm pretty ready to be just like, I'm not dad anymore. You know what I mean? Like you guys are here, and there's actually been times where I've put them to bed, I've gotten them the water, and then I hear like 10 minutes later, like, Daddy, and I'll just go in there and I'll say to them, I'm not daddy anymore. Like, you now have to call me Mr. Gonzalez. And
That's going to be
what?
so troubling.
Fine.
They're like,
It's
oh
not
my God,
traumatizing. It's not traumatizing.
are you not my
Um,
dad right now?
yeah.
What are you saying?
Fortunately, my kids know that I'm being
Yeah,
super goofy with
right.
them. But
Right. That you're really just saying, like, enough already, guys. Like, your
yeah,
dad's
because then
real
they'll be like,
tired.
Dad, I'll be like, what's my name? Then they'll be like, Mr. Gonzalez.
I love that.
I don't do it all the time. It's very rarely that I do
Yeah,
that. I just when I think
I
it's
love
funny.
that. It is
So we
amazing,
tried.
though, because you're tired and kids can get real needy at night.
Mm-hmm,
And I find actually teenagers want to talk in the middle of the night
mm-hmm.
more than they do during the daytime. And so, on the one hand, I have to balance, like, I need to talk to them, but on the other hand, I need to rest, right? But it is tricky with kids.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I do think like so much of that is just like our kids are preparing to transition. Like they're transitioning from a time of being awake to a time of being away from you. And for little ones like that can be scary.
Yeah,
That's like, oh, here I am, voyaging off into the dark unknown,
yeah,
and you're leaving. And so I kind of do want to find a way to make sure you're still there. And it's it's tough to balance that need with like our own
yeah,
need, and to kind of put ours on hold. But I wonder if this post bedtime thing is a time for rest and connection as opposed to checking out and numbing can be good. Because,
yeah,
we've also tried to, like apart from just giving each other a free night to go check in with friends or catch up on stuff that, you want to catch up on or just do whatever you want to do. To kind of reconnect with the fact that like you're a person who likes doing things. um, we also tried to have like a weekly date night, um, just as a time to sit up and catch up and not be interrupted by all of the demands around us. And even, that book that we had looked at a couple times, The Habits of the Household, Justin Earley, he
hmm
really says that it's an important way to rehearse the covenant of marriage, like date night, and that is in fact a rehearsal of God's covenant with God's people, because the wedding feast is this essential image, right, in Jesus's preaching. So like leaning into some of that rehearsing, like if you're married, can be like a real um, sacramental kind of moment, of like we're rehearsing the marriage feast here a little bit.
yeah.
You know.
Wow. I think that's so neat. That's so
Mm-hmm.
interesting because the marriage feast is so central, right? Like I always tell my Sunday school kids, I'm like, whoa, there's another banquet. Quick, what's the banquet? And the
Mm-hmm.
banquet is it's the Eucharist, it's the end of days, it's the wedding banquet. It's, when you're wedded to one another and you're wedded to Christ. And how interesting to think of date night as being related to that. But it really
Yeah.
is, right? Especially because generally you go out to dinner, you break bread together, you know, that is very beautiful. And you reconnect and you kind of reinvigorate that covenant. I like that.
and and with like a standing date, right? I mean, it's the same thing we do with like Sunday liturgy. Like that's
Yeah.
rehearsing the covenant that God has made with God's people.
Yep.
That's our, like, we're doing, it's like date night with God, right? Like is the divine liturgy,
Yeah.
like come to my table, like have
Yeah.
like eat my body,
Yeah.
like drink my, like this is like it's
Yeah.
just such an intimate encounter. And like our date nights with our spouses, if we're married, really have the capacity to be a way of like showing and participating in God's like unending faithfulness to us. Because if no matter how we feel about each other, no matter how much is undone, no matter how irritated we've been throughout the day, like we've got date night, like,
Yes.
and we're
Can't
going to
get out
show
of
up
it.
and we're going to do the liturgy,
That's right.
and like the liturgy
Yeah.
is like we show up, we break bread, we drink wine, and we suss it out. We really,
Yeah.
let's talk about it. What's going on?
I
Um,
love that so much because I think
yeah.
about too, like with Sunday liturgy, there is this, people will say like, well, I don't have to go to church. I can go out into the wilderness and pray, right? Or whatever. And there's this sort of sense that like there's something very structured about going to church on Sundays. And it's like less individual, less personal because it's corporate and everybody's
Mm-hmm.
there and it's this ritual that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And date night is a little bit like that because it's like, well, we can be with each other anytime and we sit together in the living room or we whatever. But it's like, no, when you set aside a structure and you have this separate thing, even if it is in that sense sort of artificial, or like out in public or shared in this way that maybe doesn't make sense to you initially or doesn't feel as genuine as just like spontaneous moments when you're having a great conversation. It's having that structure that keeps you there.
Yeah.
And that's what brings you into communion with one another and with everyone else. And we need those structures. Like we can't just freestyle it all the time. It doesn't work. We begin to forget and we don't even realize how long it's been
Yeah.
since we have remembered. And then soon we
Yeah.
don't want to remember, it's dangerous. So
And like
I
the
think that's
liturgy,
great.
sometimes it feels great and sometimes it doesn't, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes,
Yeah.
and
Sometimes
by,
you're not into it.
yeah, you're just like, all right, we did it. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was
For
great.
real.
But it really is like the foundation, like if you're married, of your family life, like to be connected with like this person who's like the closest human relationship that you have,
Yeah.
like that this is it. Like this is the person I chose, and that I have, like sometimes with couples that are fighting, that when I see them, I have to like remind them, like, you chose each other.
Right.
This didn't happen by
Right.
accident. Like
Nobody
you didn't just
assigned
like,
him to you.
yeah, exactly. You chose each other. And so
Yeah.
what are you going to do now to
Yeah.
continue to choose each other?
For real. Yeah.
And like, that's the big
I love
thing
that.
that we need to
Well,
run
and
into.
I
But
mean, we have a tendency to like throw ourselves into our kids, especially these
mhm,
generations. And ultimately, the kids need to grow up and go. They need to leave. And you don't want to be at that moment where the last kids are leaving and you panic and realize that you're stuck with someone who's now a stranger, or who's
yep.
not really the one that you want to be with anymore. And so
Hmm.
we really have to actively cultivate that. Like that is a job, and it takes effort, and sometimes more effort than others, and that's
Yeah.
okay. It's okay. It's to be
It's interesting.
expected.
I once heard someone say, like, in the course of your life, in the course of your life, you'll likely be married to you'll likely have three marriages. And if you're lucky, they're all with the same person.
Yes, that's so true, right? There's like
Yeah.
marriage before you have kids. There's this like active phase of really actively parenting together. And then there's like, oh, the active parenting job is not here. And now we
Hmm.
have to be ready to do something together.
Yeah.
And
So it's like the marriage thing is like got to be figured out.
yeah,
um,
I mean, it really does. You can't drop it
mhm.
for anything. You can't drop it for a minute. You have to
Yeah.
keep it going.
And sometimes to like aid, the conversation, like if we're both tired or whatever, and we don't really have a lot to report, my wife had bought these like therapy cards. Um, so we
Oh,
have like, they're
cool.
just like different kind of like conversation starters. I wish I could remember some of the questions, but it might be like, I don't know, what was an experience of awe you had or something like that, right? Like that can be such a cool conversation to start having. You're like, oh, I
Yeah.
never would have thought to ask somebody that question, but
Oh,
um,
that's neat.
yeah.
I have cards like that that I've purchased for my family, like to get
Mm-hmm.
teenagers talking,
Mm-hmm.
especially on road trips or at the
Mm-hmm.
dinner table, like when they're all just not into a conversation or whatever.
All
Um,
right, kids, here come the cards. Oh,
Seriously, it's like, listen, you can either tell me how your day was or I'm opening this box. But
yes.
the truth is they enjoy it. And like once we
Hmm.
start going, they're like, okay, what's the next one? What's the next one? And it's
Yeah,
like they're
totally.
just gonna do one, but they want to do it because it's fun. And there are things that you don't know what the other people are gonna say. And that's
Hmm.
interesting. And
Hmm.
so yeah, when I first remarried and we were trying to figure out how to bring all these teenagers together in our Brady Bunch life, that was one of my big strategies was all these cards.
I love it.
But I don't use them just me and my husband, and I think that's a great idea. I
Yeah,
like
I
that.
mean, because it's a really important thing, and I think we do need to make scheduling, like even in our world, like we need to make scheduling it a priority. We schedule everything else, and
Yep.
then somehow, because it's just like, oh, again, like you said, like, oh, we're married, we can kind of whatever connect whenever we want. It's like, unless you have that specific time set apart, like this is our time that we're going to pledge to one another. It's just so easy to overlook it, and I think the reality is what doesn't get scheduled doesn't get done.
Yep.
So you're not going to happen into a date night. So,
Yep.
but I guess, like, we talked a lot about date night, and I don't want to like alienate maybe some of like the single parents who might be listening too,
Yeah.
because um, man, it's and I want to honor like the grown up time thing has got to be tough. Like if you're on your own.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. I mean, what would you kind of say about like how should single parents think about this stuff?
Well, I mean, I was a single parent for a short time, right? Really a divorced parent because my ex-husband was always very active as a father. He just
Mm,
was not my husband anymore. But
mm-hmm.
I would say one of the things that I tried to do, but my kids were older, so not everybody can. But if your kids are old enough to be left alone for a couple of hours, having a date night of your own is not so bad,
Mm,
honestly. Like leaving the house, just being outside the house, go for a walk, go out to dinner, either with a friend or maybe alone. Like maybe that's okay. Maybe go see a movie. Get to be outside of that space, especially I would say for I've worked from home. And so, which is flexible and wonderful. It's so great, but it also means you never get out of your house.
mm,
And so, when my kids were old enough that I could go for a couple of hours, I felt like that was really helpful. And having dinner with friends, I'm a really social person. I really need to, but I think everybody's social. You may be introverted, you may be extroverted, but we all need friendships and we all need connection with other adults. So I think that that's really important. I think if you can't leave the house, there are all kinds of things you can do. You can have, maybe you have a friend who can come over and hang
mm,
out in the
mm-hmm.
evening,
Yeah.
which, a lot of times we don't think of, right? It's like, oh, if I can't get a babysitter, I can't see my friends. It's like, well, I mean, I don't know. When you go to the grocery store, why don't you get some cheese and wine and have your friend come over, right? Like
Yeah.
that can happen. That can
Yep.
happen. That can still be a lot of fun. And I think the other
That's
thing
actually most
too,
of how we do date night married is like we do
right?
it at home. We just go sit
Right.
on the
I mean, it's
patio. Yeah.
expensive. There's some inflation. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's
Mm-hmm.
like
A little bit.
it's $10,000 to go out to dinner right now. So it's like, but there's that, and then there's also it sort of struck me like things like journaling. Like this idea of sort of processing your day and kind of going through, like you were saying at the
Mm,
beginning, right? The church's prayers for midnight are about penitence and hopeful anticipation. And you can build
mm-hmm.
that into prayer. You can build it into conversation with one another. And you can build it into conversation with yourself, where you
Mm,
kind of try to process where you are and what's going on. And you also want to spend a little of that looking forward to what's coming and having
yeah.
some hopeful anticipation about the
Yeah. I
coming
mean, the
day.
reflecting on the day can be such a stilling thing to kind of because we miss things, like on first viewing. And then if we kind of like reflect back, like there can be like things that show up, right? I mean, I've always wanted to have the habit of journaling at night. uh it's been helpful
Mm-hmm.
for me often to like read my journals and when I come back to them later or whatever. um but it's never really been a thing that's established itself firmly in my life as a habit, and I really wish that it would, because looking back over the day, like I feel like that opens up space to be like quiet and curious.
Mm-hmm.
Like how did I see the Lord at work today, and where was he maybe trying to get my attention, and where did I miss him,
Yeah.
and how did he get my attention, where was he successful? And I think there's so much good that can come from that, because then we're setting the kind of the framework for like expecting that tomorrow is time also for the Lord to act. That like
Yes.
here we go into tomorrow. I just looked and saw where what he was doing and maybe what I missed, and um, now tomorrow I need to be ready for it. So
Yeah.
how do you prepare for the next day? Like if part of this is about kind of this is the beginning of tomorrow. Like, do you have a way that you prepare for tomorrow?
I kind of
Mine's really
don't,
lame.
and I'm feeling like I should right now. Like I'm starting to think that would be a really good idea. I sort of don't. I'm one of those people who's very like tomorrow will take care of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I finish out this day and I go to sleep. And then the next day. So like if you ask me what I'm doing tomorrow or like what time do I have meetings or what's going I don't know. I will
Mm-hmm.
find out in the morning. I don't look ahead.
Love it.
Well, it's not great because if I make plans early in the morning, I do miss
Yeah.
them because I haven't looked yet. But I feel like
Because I don't know.
that's part of my strategy for not being overwhelmed because I have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
stuff going on. And it's like I have to do it one day at a time, and I trust that I have my planner and all the things fit and all the things fit in that day, or else I wouldn't have put them there. And if
Yep.
they don't fit, then the Lord will let me know which ones to drop. And I
Yes.
will, you know.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think like now from my perspective, kind of just through this conversation of thinking like the end of the day as being not actually the end of one day, but the beginning of the new one.
Yeah.
Like that might be why I think in some ways I've kind of instinctively done things like prep the coffee for the next day, right? Like I'll
Yep.
grind the coffee, put water in the kettle, um, make sure that my alarm clock is set. You know what I mean? Like all of that
Yeah.
stuff is, if I think about that as preparing, like not as preparing for tomorrow, but like this is how
The
I'm
day's
starting my
beginning.
day. I'm starting
Yeah.
my day this way is because like I'm in that space, and like my wife will do things like set out her exercise clothes, so there's as few obstacles as possible to like get out the door, because she goes and
Yes.
exercises early in the morning, which is like something that I admire her so much about. Um, but I think going to bed with like the anticipation of the next day or the next morning, maybe a
Mm-hmm.
better way to put it.
At least the next morning. Yeah.
The next morning, yeah, like
Yeah.
this is the new day, this is the new morning, the next morning. Uh, there
Even
is that
setting.
anticipation, right? There's like a hope. I
Yeah.
love my morning coffee. I love my morning coffee.
Yeah. And you're
And so
preparing
if
it for
I'm,
yourself as a gift to
yeah,
tomorrow's Christian. Yeah.
it's
But it's
exactly,
really just later this day because it's already
yeah,
midnight. That's
it's next
cool.
morning.
Yeah. And I think it is true. There is a certain, also, there's just something built in. When you're setting the alarms, which is one thing that I do prepare at night, I do always check and make sure my alarms are on. And I think about what time, am I going to be getting up at the right time or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm doing that, there is something hopeful, even in the sense that, like, that means that I trust that there's going to be a tomorrow. Like, I
Mm.
know that the sun is coming up tomorrow, and I'm setting an alarm so that I don't sleep in,
Oh,
because there are going to be things, right? Like, I'm going to exist, my family's going to exist, my job's going to exist. Like, there is actually an optimism built into that, if you think about it, right? That, like, even though it's midnight and it's dark out, I believe the sun's going to come back up. And when it
dude,
does, I
this
got to be ready.
now we're talking literally like practicing death and resurrection.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I'm going to
You
lay
know?
down and die now, but I know I'm going to come back to life in the morning. I'm ready for it.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
cool.
I mean,
That's
there
cool.
is like a, and even too when we put our
Yeah.
kids to bed, there's like a. I had a friend who, I mean, this is just reminding me of a friend who told me like when he would put his kids to bed, it becomes this like thing of where he's, he had this dream where he was like having to bury his children. It was like horrible, and it's like something obviously that you know about, but like the act of putting his kids to bed has
Mm-hmm.
now for him become this way of practicing death and resurrection, like
Yeah.
knowing that if I were ever to lose them, they would come back to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
in the end,
Yeah.
and man, that's
I
powerful
mean,
stuff.
not to go like even darker than that, but my son passed away in his sleep, right? He died of SIDS. So
Mm-hmm.
I had PTSD and I had to work through all of that. And what my therapist had given me were like, I would say these prayers that were, instead of saying like, God, don't let them die, which was only increasing my anxiety and my concern, it was like, Lord, I thank you that every time I check on them, they're warm and alive, and that they're going to get up and greet the new morning. And it
Mm.
was like this, like speaking aloud a trust that I maybe didn't already have. But
Mm.
the more that I spoke it aloud, the more that I began to have it, and the more it got reinforced every day that it did come true and it was okay. And that's
Yeah.
how I worked
Yeah.
out of that. But it really is. It's true that there's a lot of trust that goes into putting your kids to bed at night.
Mm.
Even just that you're going to go in a different room and you're going to go to sleep and you're not going to be able to see what's going on with them, right? Like, I mean,
Yep.
there's a part, and I think there's some little bit of every parent's brain that's like, no, 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 no. I'm just going to sit right here and make sure everything's okay all the time.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of trust in that, and there's a willingness to put it all down and die that little death,
Yeah.
knowing that you're going to get up in the morning and
Yeah,
start
and that's
again.
that hopeful anticipation, I think, that
Yeah.
we're talking about here, right? That like, I
Yeah.
am practicing anticipating my resurrection, and I'm practicing anticipating my
Yeah.
children's resurrection,
Yeah.
knowing that I can trust that even though I will essentially be practicing being dead, like it's gonna be okay.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
something.
You're training yourself to be okay when you lose loved ones, and you're having to trust that there's going to be a resurrection and that you're all going to,
Mhm.
rise up in it. And then, of course, when we pass, as we get older, we start worrying about it ourselves. I don't
Yeah.
think you're quite there yet, Christian, but I'm beginning to really feel my mortality. It
Oh, I
turns
feel it.
out that people who are 70 are only 20 years older than me. Oh my gosh.
That's not many
Hold
years. Yeah.
on a minute. Not quite. I'm still 49, but I'm like real close. And I was like, every once in a while, something like that hits me. And I'm like, mostly with actors,
Oh.
right? Like actors, I remember being not that much older than me, and they're all senior citizens now. And I'm like, it's right around the corner. Senior discount.
Oh yeah,
Oh my goodness. Went out to
Well,
dinner
I mean,
at
this is,
4:30.
I think that like this is probably just about the best thing that we can, think to end here is like this movement of post bedtime, like the grown up time being about rest, connection, and then finally just like folding into the arms of God and in trust and in hopeful anticipation of resurrection. I mean, like this is what all of this is about. Like if we really
All
see
of
how
it.
this is connected to the story, every moment in the domestic monastery can bring us home. So I hope that as we go forward, kind of that, at least for me, once my kids are in bed, that I don't just choose to tune out. You
Yeah.
know, um,
Well, and I mean,
yeah,
it's that despair and that fear of death and that fear of the future and all of those things, right? Like you have two choices. You can kind of take a deep breath and trust God and have that enter into that death because you have hopeful anticipation of the resurrection, or you can check out. And that
yep,
is just, that's unfortunately, I think a lot of times that's what we want to do at night. And I think that's kind of what our culture teaches us to do,
yep,
and that's the story around us. That's the story we're being fed, but we have to answer it with our Christian story.
yes,
Not your
yeah.
story, but our Christian stories from
The
Jesus.
the Christian story, the
Yes.
Christian Gonzalez story. Um, so I think the call here for us is probably to try to realize that even post bedtime is sacred. Like this is a sacred time,
Yeah.
and that there's value in honoring it as such, as a way to rest, to connect, and ultimately kind of collapse into the arms of God in loving trust. So,
Glory to God.
Elisa, how can people find you?
Go to my website. It's just my name. If you can figure out how to spell my name, and good luck with that, then you can find me. Just go to elisabielichdavis.com. How about you?
Well, still, as always, I'm not on the socials, but with my organization OIM, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at the OIM official, or head over to our website at theoim.org. You can join our mailing list, see what we've got coming down the pipeline.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And
Well,
as
thanks
always,
for
we'd love to
joining
hear
us,
from
guys.
you. So,
Yes.
we want to know what you guys do at nighttime. Any
Yes.
awesome stuff? Because we are always open to ideas.
We'd love to be inspired. Send us
Dear
something.
parents at ancientfaith.com. We've also got a speak pipe in the link, so use it. Call us. We're not lonely.
You sound so desperate, Christian.
That's only because I am.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, I only sound that way because I am that way.
Perfect. And so ends our series on the domestic monastery.
Bye.
This has been a listener-supported joint presentation of OYM, Orthodox Youth and Young Adult Ministries, and Ancient Faith Radio.